Hello, everyone. It is Jaime Jo Wright with MadLit Musings podcast. And today we have Christy Award-Winning author Sarah Sundin with us. And we've waited a while to call you a Christy Award-Winning author. I'm excited to announce you like that.
Thank you.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. So Christy Award, Carol Award winner, and I know you have a very loyal fan base of readers too, because I hear about you a lot from people who love your books. So
I'm very thankful for them.
yeah, I bet. But you have another book coming out, The Sound of Light, which comes out February 7th from Revell Publishing. So we're here to talk about it. What are we going to see in this book? Because you're World War II, so I know where we're going.
Yeah, so we are going to Denmark. And
Ooh.
yeah, I know. And I chose this setting because it's not one you see a lot in historical fiction. But they're fascinating stories. And as I was doing my research, in other books, the stories of Denmark kept popping up. I go, wow, I want to tell these stories. They're different than you see in a lot of mostly occupied countries. They follow a certain pattern, but Denmark was very different. And also one of the most inspiring stories to come out of World War II was in Denmark, and that was the rescue of the Danish Jews. And when I read the story, I thought, it was so astonishing and so beautiful. Like, I really want to work this, into a novel. So I finally came up with my hero and my heroine, and I'm so thankful Revell let me write it because it is an unusual setting, and oftentimes it's harder to get the unusual settings published. So I was thrilled I was able to tell this story at last.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm not sure that I've ever heard the story of the rescue of the Danish Jews. Because you mentioned that, and I'm like, that does not ring a bell.
Yeah, it's amazing. In a nutshell, before the war, there were over 7,000 Jews in Denmark. It was a small population, but they were very well integrated. They had a lot of refugees from Germany and Poland. And when the Germans invaded, it was an odd situation in that the Germans saw the Danes as fellow Aryans. So they decided to make Denmark a model protectorate, and they were going to be very nice to the Danes and let Denmark run itself, basically. They let their king remain on the throne. They let their parliament keep running. Their government ran as before with some interference, but actually not a lot, especially when you compare it to the other occupied countries. They kind of let them do their own thing.
Okay.
And so Denmark didn't have a history of anti-Semitism. So when the Germans started putting pressure on them to put in anti-Semitic laws, the Danish government said, no, I'm not going to do that. They're our fellow citizens. Why would we do that? And so they didn't have, for 3 years, they had no anti-Semitic laws in Denmark. There were a few exceptions, but in almost all situations, their Jewish citizens kept their jobs. They stayed in their homes. They did not have to wear the yellow star. Just an unusual situation. Obviously, Himmler and Goebbels and all those people were not happy with that, and they were just biding their time. Like, well, there's 7,000 Jews there. We can't have that happen in late German Reich. So they put pressure on the German plenipotentiary in Denmark, and eventually he just issued an edict. It's straight out of the Book of Esther. Like, on one night after Rosh Hashanah, they were going to round up all the Jews in Denmark.
Oh my goodness.
Because they knew they were going to be at home. It was the Sabbath right after Rosh Hashanah. They knew they were all going to be at home, so it'd be easy to round them up. And what they didn't count on was that there was a German shipping attaché, Georg Duckwitz, who loved the Danes. He felt very fond of them. He'd been working there for years. And Werner Best, who was the plenipotentiary, told Duckwitz about it. Duckwitz then went out and talked about risk to his own life. Went out and told members of the Danish government, who then went out and told the rabbis, and the word spread throughout Denmark. And as one, the people of Denmark rose up and just basically said to all their Jewish neighbors, come stay at my house, or here are the keys to my summer cottage in the country. And they hid almost all the Jews, just all around. And so when they went that night to round people up, they were only able to arrest 474. Now, granted, 474 people that should not have been arrested, but out of
Right.
7,000. That was amazing. But then they had another problem. They've got 7,000 people in hiding.
Yeah.
That forever. And so with some pressure, international pressure, Sweden offered to take all the Jews
Okay.
and get them across. There's 10 miles between Denmark, and Sweden. So the Danish people, these just ordinary people, they took them across in fishing boats and in private yachts and in the cargo holds of ships and in rowboats and in kayaks, one by one. And they got all those people across. I mean, just outstanding. And then they weren't even done. Of those 474 people who were arrested, the Danish people kept pressure on the Germans, like, we need to know about our people. What's going on with our people? And they took them first to Theresienstadt, which is meant to be a transit camp in Auschwitz. But because of the pressure of the Danish people, they kept them at Theresienstadt and even sent care packages with food and vitamins. And so there were 58 deaths of those 474. And a lot of them were elderly people. So they might have passed away anyway. But they had the highest survival rate of Jewish population in any occupied country. And that was because of the common decency, humanity of the Danish people who said, you cannot do that to our people. They are our people. They are our brothers and sisters. And that was just so beautiful and inspiring. Like, I got to tell that story.
Oh, no kidding. How come that story isn't like more heralded?
And I think a lot of it is because the Danish people, their national character, they are very modest and unassuming.
Yeah.
The saying about the tall poppy getting cut off, they don't want to be the tall poppy, so they don't toot their own horn. This would happen in America. They'd be all over social media, like what I did. But not the Danes. They're like, oh no, I didn't do much. I just helped my neighbor. I just
rowed a boat.
I just rowed a boat.
We row boats all the time.
We row boats. So it was because of that nature. And that made, in general, it made research for this novel difficult because the members of the Danish resistance, the people who rescued the Jews, most of them said, oh, I didn't do much. So they didn't really record their stories. So it's harder to find those stories than it is in nations. So I just had to do a little more digging and also trying to find sources that were not in Danish. Since
right. You don't speak Danish, huh? Wow.
Shockingly, no. I speak German, and sometimes there's some similarities. You're like, oh yeah, I see that, but not enough to translate page.
Wow. And so that's the setting for The Sound of Light then. Okay. Wow. So tell me just a little bit then about your characters. Like, who do we get to meet in this book?
Well, you get to meet Baron Henrik Elefelt, and he is a fun character. He is a nobleman before the war. He lived for himself. He was known as a playboy, a man about town, selfish, he's just living for himself.
Sure.
And as soon as the Germans come, he just kind of has this shocker moment and goes, this is what my life is. And I want more. I want to be more. I want to do more. And he is enlisted by his friend, Sven, who is a outspoken anti-Nazi, and he needs to escape because Germans are here. I need to get out of the country. Yeah. So he says, Henrik was on the Olympic rowing team. And he says, row me to Sweden. And you can row that distance in your sleep. I couldn't do that, but he could. Right. And so Henrik does that. And as they're rowing across, Sven puts together this plan where Henrik could row messages back and forth between Denmark and Sweden. And Henrik decides this is a good thing for him, but he also knows he's well known in Denmark. He's also known as a member of the rowing team. So if the Germans get wind of, a nobleman, they're coming to his door. So he decides to go underground. He takes on a secret identity. And writing a secret identity was so fun. And he takes a job at the shipyard and becomes just a manual labor. And to conceal his noble upbringing, he basically doesn't talk much. And very simple words. So everybody thinks he's not very bright, and they treat him accordingly. And very humbling experience for him. And he's a nobleman. He's used to telling people what to do. And now he's being treated, not only bossed around, but treated like he's terribly bright. But it works for him. And so he has this second set of papers, and he moves in 1943. So he's been doing this for 3 years. He moves into a boarding house. And one of the residents is Dr. Elsa Johnson, who is a theoretical physicist.
Oh my goodness, Sarah. Could have made her a baker.
And that actually fit better because, Danes, and they'd be like, Christian romance, like, oh, she's baking chocolates and stuff like that. Her theoretical physicist, because and I was a chemistry major. And also the other thing, when I was doing my research, the name of Niels Bohr kept popping up. And Niels Bohr was a Nobel laureate. He's a real man. He's a Nobel laureate. And he, his model, the atom, revolutionized chemistry and physics. And he was instrumental in quantum mechanics. And he had an institute in Copenhagen. And he was also kind of on the fringes of the resistance, very far fringes. And he also was half Jewish. So he had to escape. And they ordered to arrest him and his wife and his sons. So he was part of the escape. And I thought, what if we're there? And I have, this is actually probably a recurring thing for me, is telling stories of women in a men's world. And I do back to that. It's just, especially for that era, but it's just something that resonates with me. I think probably grew up reading too many biographies of, women who were doing these things, and it just resonates with me. And so telling the story of this woman who's not just trying to do this great research, but she's having to overcome some prejudice. And so that was fun. And the neat thing was that Niels Bohr himself, gosh, I really wish I could have met him. He sounds like just a standing man. He was very welcoming. He had lots of female physicists there, treated them great. He welcomed refugees. And so he had Jewish refugees at his institute. And so he was just a very humble man and a very generous man. And so it was fun to include him in the story. And so because she's a girl in this men's field, her senior physicist is mistreating her and like, oh, you're the girl, go make copies.
Oh.
Yeah. So she kind of gets shamed into copies. So she learns how to use the mimeograph machine. And her best friend is working for the Resistance within the Resistance newspaper. And she says, Elsa, we could definitely use some more mimeographing. You know how to use the machine. You have access. We know that Niels Bohr is at least partial to the Resistance. And he eventually convinces Elsa to start printing newspapers for the Resistance, which was not a very safe thing to do.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, she's getting very intrigued by the ship worker at the boarding house, and just kind of senses more to him. And she senses depth of character to him, and is drawn to him. And she obviously then she's got to work with her prejudices, because here she is, and she's got a PhD, and she's being drawn to a man who can barely read. And at least that's what she thinks.
That's what she believes, right?
That's what she believes. And so she, what do you do? And I love her best friend, who's a little bit of a spitfire, and she was fun to write to. And so Lila tells her, how many men male scientists do we know who have wives who are not well educated? Nobody thinks anything of it. Why is it different for women? She's like,
I love that.
I was like, yeah, it shouldn't be. And she says, and yet it is,
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun. So she was, really confronting her own prejudices and, the expectations of society. And, what was more important to her was it a man's education or a man's character? And
I love that.
So, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, let's end this so I can go read this book. Just kidding. I don't want to end it yet, but let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of courage, because that time period Courage is something you see all the time woven through these stories, and I just want to talk about courage in light of that and in light of today, and we'll do that when we come back. Hello, everyone. We are back here at MadLit Musings with Sarah Sundin, Christy Award-Winning, Carol Award-Winning Sarah Sundin. She's not going to yell that out, so I'm just going to keep saying it for her. But we've been talking about her release, The Sound of Light, which is set in Denmark. And we've been talking about the resistance there, and the saving of the Danish Jews, which I have just learned a whole lot in the last, 15 minutes we've been talking. It's fascinating. But I was saying before we took a break, the concept of courage is so often linked with obviously that time period and all the different things that took place. How did you see courage as it was woven into the story that you wrote and into the time period that you were researching?
Yeah, it was fascinating. It really was the theme of this story. And at one point, so Elsa is having problems. She's deciding whether she wants to help with the resistance. She's also having this problem with her senior physicist, and does she speak up to him? And she is a woman who is, soft-spoken. She's gentle. She hates confrontation. She hates conflict. And so she's always told herself that how wonderful she is because she manages to hold her tongue when people insult her. And we all, that is a good thing, right? And so she prides herself on that. But as the situation with her boss is getting worse and worse and worse, and like all bullies, he sees somebody caving in as, well, now I've got to come down even harder. And so being nice is not going to make the situation any better. And she has to, one thing, she has to learn the difference between being nice and being kind. And that is a crucial thing for her. But she realizes she needs to find the courage to speak up. And at one point, Henrik, and this is as Hemming, the humble shipyard worker, tells her, sometimes silence takes much courage. And that really resonates with her. She's like, oh yeah, sometimes it does. It is hard sometimes to hold your tongue and not say something.
Right.
Hurt somebody, or when it would cause damage to relationship, or in case of World War II, where you could get somebody killed if you said the wrong thing. So there are times when being silent is a very courageous and is the right thing to do. And then Henrik says, but sometimes silence is nothing but cowardice. That really hits her hard, and she realizes in this situation she's just being cowardly. She's telling herself she's being wonderful and good by not speaking up. But in this case, not speaking up is actually cowardly. And to speak up would be the courageous thing to do. So both Henrik and Elsa throughout the whole story are wrestling with this concept of, when is it courageous to be silent and when is it courageous to speak up? And when is it the right thing to do? Just sometimes it's the right thing to do to be silent, and sometimes it's the right thing to do to speak up. And pulling out all our motives for wanting to be silent or wanting to speak up, and deciding what's the right thing to do, and then having the courage to do it.
Yeah, and that's difficult because it's such a fine line to walk.
It is.
And sometimes you feel like if you don't speak up, it's going to just get worse. And then there's other times when you do speak up and it just gets worse because you spoke up. And so
exactly. And sometimes
we figure that out.
Oh yeah. And sometimes we speak up and that's purely pride. Well, they need a voice. And then I mean, what's going on in our nation right now? It's everybody speaking up and nobody listening, and everybody beating each other up with their words. And it's just creating all this havoc and division. And honestly, we need a lot more silence in our country.
Yeah. And I don't think social media is really helping with the concept of silence and listening.
No, it's not. And it's a horrible, it was kind of funny. My husband was watching an email stream go from lightly joking to people getting offended. And these are, good friends of his who are Christians. And I was talking to him, I said, okay, and if you were in person and somebody made that joke, you'd have seen his smile, you would have heard his tone of voice, said, oh yeah, that's so-and-so being so-and-so. Right. And the person would have said, you know what, that wasn't quite the most appropriate joke. And oh yeah, I'm sorry. But he would have said that in a very gentle but firm way. And they would have been no, but because it was an email and and like, oh yeah, you took all the nuance out of it, you took the children out of it, you took the facial expressions out of it that would have gentled everything, and it wouldn't have been an issue. But because so social media even amplifies that, because
it does.
Even worse than email, and I end up hiding people.
Yeah.
I hide a lot of people on Facebook. Like, okay,
yeah,
I know that about you. I like you personally as a friend, and now now I'm seeing you say some horrible, cruel things on social media, and I don't want to think of you that way. So I need to hide you.
No. And the funny thing is, I've always found out too, well, I shouldn't say I've always found out, but I've always been of the opinion that nobody's changed someone's opinion on social media.
Exactly.
And, you can take it offline and have really constructive disagreements. Exactly. And I think I think it's important to have moments of disagreement and understand somebody else's viewpoint, even if you don't agree with it. Exactly. That's how you learn and continue to form opinions. But I think that's how you build trust with each other as well, when you can have those constructive conversations and not turn into flinging insults and
and really asking somebody from the opposite end of the political spectrum, and you really get to talk to them about it. You believe this, and it's often something either very personal or that it actually stems from a value that they hold very highly, and if they look at that value, it's like, that is a good value, treat others fairly, or whatever that value is, and you go to that value and say, okay, there we agree on that, and opposed to, you are evil because you think that our nation should X. It's like, their heart, they really want this, which is a value. But you can only get that when you're really talking to each other and asking questions like, why do you tell me, where does that come from, and respectfully, and and I've had these conversations with people, and it can be very eye-opening. Like, okay, I understand. I don't agree, and I hope you understand why I believe what I believe. And you don't have to agree with me, but understand that, and understand we're both coming from a position where we want something that is inherently good, and we just agree ways of getting there. But not on social media.
No, not at all. Oh man. Well, and there's been times I've thought, just going back to World War II a little bit, I've thought what it would have been like to have World War II and had internet, social media. I mean, how that would have changed the entire face of the entire time period.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The story I'm writing right now features a BBC correspondent, and one of the things he's wrestling with is complete truth versus censorship, and where sometimes the discretion is the right thing to do, and sometimes the truth is truth is always right, but how much of it you share. And in the case of the Blitz, like, 20 bombs just fell on and the Germans like, thank you, now we will adjust our navigation so we can hit the Houses of Parliament even better that next time. So in that case, absolute truth would have been disastrous, and they were right to not everything. And so they are wrestling this, and I have all those reporter friends and talking about this, and it's a very interesting subject, and like what would have been like in World War II if people were tweeting and posting videos and stuff like that. So I mean, I think a whole lot of in Europe would have gotten killed really quick.
Well, not to mention all their photos would have their GPS coordinates built into the
exactly.
Oh my goodness.
Going underground was a lot harder back then.
Oh yeah, let's hope we don't have to do that in the future. We're doomed.
It's like, selfie. Oh wait, no, I just told the evil emperor where I live.
I know, exactly, right? Oh my goodness. Well, it is interesting though, going back to the concept of courage. I love that time period, and I think that's one of the reasons that time period is so popular in fiction as well, because there's a purity in the courage, and there's a very, I don't want to say it was all black and white, because I'm sure there was lots of gray areas, but there's a lot more black and white between right and wrong. I mean, you can look at what was done to the Jewish community and be like, Wrong.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
know, and you don't have to fight with, well, maybe in this situation, or
Yeah, no.
you don't, there's none of that, right?
There's none of that. But then the gray areas, and I love to explore the gray areas. It's like,
Yeah.
For one thing, a lot of people didn't know exactly what was going on, and
Okay.
they had idea. They had some. There was people like to say, oh, they didn't know people were getting killed until they found the concentration camps, and that was not true. There were in 1942, early 1942, they were already publishing reports of 1 million Jews being killed in, in the Soviet Union, Poland. So they weren't focusing on it, but the knowledge was there. But then you come to your own personal situation. And do I risk my life for someone I don't know?
Right.
Risk it for a neighbor? Do I risk a job? Do I risk my family? It's one thing, and there's a reason almost such a high percentage of the resistance members in every country were young men. Teenagers to the early 20s, because they had nothing to lose. They had no career, they had no homes, they weren't married, they didn't have any children, they had parents, but I'm 20, I don't.
Right. There was some adventure, but yeah, you do have that. I don't want to say devil may care, because I'm sure they cared, but
they cared. But and then also obviously with young men, I mean, I have unusual young men in my life. My two sons, one is extremely cautious. He would probably not have done that. He's very, 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 very ethical and right-minded. He would have probably found some quiet way to do something, but he's also not to grab a gun. Anyway, but there's that sense of immortality that young men have. And that's why traffic accidents are such a problem with young male drivers, because like, well, I can't die. I'll just jump off a building. Sure, I'll bounce. And you put that in a time of war, and you add that with youthful passion, and they were the first to resist. In every nation was the young men, but then you start getting to, and then it would happen a lot with the poor. Once again, not much to lose.
Right.
You start getting people who have nice homes and nice jobs, and you start thinking, am I willing to risk this?
Right.
And that's where it gets a little gray, and you wonder, would I have done that? And I honestly don't know. I think I would have, helped my neighbor. Would I've gone past that and printed newspapers, stuff like that? I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I've thought of that too. You put yourself in different situations, and I always used to think, oh, sure, I would have been in the resistance, and that was in the days before I had kids. Well, now I have kids. And the Nazis weren't exactly nice about who they used to make you break, know. And it's one thing for me to go through some sort of interrogation. It's another to witness and watch them interrogate somebody completely innocent in order for me to break. And
yeah, I know.
Yeah. It's a whole
not a lot of moms involved. Not a lot of moms involved in the resistance. So
yeah. And for probably really good reason, honestly. Yeah.
I honestly think that's okay.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
That's their own sign of courage right there, is they need to take care of their families. I mean, there's a place for each person. And you do hear, I know I've read books on the resistance in World War II, and you hear the quiet stories that they're just such small things in light of the big things that they don't get shouted from the rooftops. But it's like the mother who has the little children at home, and then she makes the extra bread rolls and quickly hides them in the bushes for the Jewish neighbors to come grab in the cloak of darkness. And those are just as heroic.
Oh, they are, and just as necessary. And the thing is that strikes me, especially when learning about Denmark, it's like not very many people did big things. There were people who did big things. There was organized resistance. They did some big dramatic things, but almost everything was little things, and people refusing to do the wrong thing and doing the right thing. And it was those little things, and taking in one neighbor. That didn't require that much work and that much effort, that much danger. But they did great things because of that. And I think that's what speaks to me too. It's just that if everybody did something, how little the Germans would have been able to accomplish. Because look at what happened in Denmark. Now, granted, they had some extra situations there, which made their situation. They're right next to Sweden. So none of those countries didn't have the same situation that Denmark did,
Right.
but it just speaks to in so many of the occupied country, the people betrayed their neighbors, or
Oh yeah.
if the French police rounded up the Jewish
Yep.
population.
Yep.
We talked about the Germans around. No, it was the French police.
Right.
And wow, if the French had refused to do that, would have had to bring in more German soldiers to do that, which would have inhibited the war. So so there's a lot of that. It's like if everybody just did something or refused to do the wrong thing,
what would change?
Prevent. Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation, and we could probably talk for another 2 or 3 hours. Which means you just have to come back again, right? You just need to write another book and then come back. We'll talk about that one. But Sarah, if people want to find out more about The Sound of Light that released from Revell, or releases on February 7th, and the whole litany of other great novels that you've written, where can they find out more about you?
Well, my website is sarahsundin.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter at my name. I'm pretty easy to find. And I love to hear from readers and people who love history, and just come say hi.
Sounds great. Well, thanks so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.